Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom. This week, we've been looking at Eupraxsophy and other good practical wisdoms for ways to live. Paul Kurtz, the secular humanist, came up with this particular term. He says Eupraxsophy is a non-religious life stance or worldview emphasizing the importance of living an ethical and exuberant life and relying on rational methods such as logic, observation, and science. And what I've been saying this week is, one of the things is we can look back pre-Christianity in the Western world to find out some more good life philosophies out there. Many Americans, because when they do exit the Christian round, go straight to Asian religions. That's one thing to do because those tend to be secular in orientation, about the mind and spiritual practice. But we do have a tradition here in the Western world that was nearly stamped out by the advent of Christianity, but it did survive. And we have this term that I think Paul Kurtz was thinking about when he made up Eupraxsophy, that's his coinage, called eudaimonia, which means human flourishing. And as I've mentioned several times, you will see in quotes around the mistranslation of happiness. The ancient Greeks didn't talk about happiness. They talked about human flourishing. So we have the eudaimonic schools that were part of the ancient Greek and Roman worlds. The four biggest ones were the Cynics, the Epicureans, the Stoics, and the Skeptics. The Epicureans and the Stoics lasted the longest as groups and also produced the most in the way of written texts that we can look back on. We will need to talk about Epicureanism sometime. This week, I've been leaning a little bit more on Stoicism. The cardinal virtues, these were invented by Aristotle in something he called virtue ethics, something that he recommended we meditate on, and those are wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. What the Greeks saw as the four cardinal virtues of being a human being: wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. I should mention that as I talk about Stoicism, that we have a contemporary form of Stoicism that is used clinically in the United States, and that is cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT. I just pulled this directly off Wikipedia. Precursors of certain fundamental aspects of CBT have been identified in various ancient philosophical traditions, particularly Stoicism. Stoic philosophers, particularly Epictetus, believed logic could be used to identify and discard false beliefs that lead to destructive emotions, which has influenced the way modern cognitive behavioral therapists identify cognitive distortions that contribute to depression and anxiety. The founders of CBT were very specifically looking back onto Stoicism and Stoic practices in the way that Stoics would study their lives, which I'm going to talk about this morning. I did mention Massimo Pagliucci. I'll show his book to you one more time, How to Be a Stoic, one of the better books, because he is very much in touch with the ancient traditions, but also practices Stoicism today as an atheistic humanist. Epictetus said happiness, and again, that would be eudaimonia, and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. We know this in popular American culture from the Serenity Prayer. The Serenity Prayer was derived from the sayings of Epictetus and then turned into a 12-step fame along the way. The Stoic happiness triangle says that you have to first off take responsibility if you're going to get to eudaimonia, flourishing life. You have to live with arete. I talked about that in terms of quality. Living into a high quality life, the best version of yourself, your highest aspirations. Know what those are, decide that that's the way you're going to go, and then make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. What is in my power and what is not in my power? And if you can change it, do. If you can't, stop worrying about it. That's the Stoic way. The steps in a Stoic lifestyle are practice negative visualization, practice self-control, practice I don't care, journaling, memento mori, remembering death, the view from above, 1,000 feet view, amor fati, or the love of what's happening to you, and take time to reflect. And I'll go through these each one. Yesterday, I ended with one of them, the premeditato malorum, that is thinking about really bad things. Often popular culture says, don't do that negative thinking, but we all know that we do. What the Stoics said to do is go with it. Go and just think about how bad it can get. And you know what? What's actually going to happen, you will be ready for it, and it's not going to seem so bad because the worst seldom happens. Epictetus put it this way: keep in mind the nature of things. Delightful things, useful things, beloved things. Start with something small, a cup perhaps. Think, if this breaks, I can bear the loss. Now, work on thinking this about everything you know. Start small, work up. Another of the Stoic ways of doing spiritual practice, the inner work, is to build Stoic fortitude or to practice self-control. The Stoics would fast, for example, but they weren't programmatic about it. They didn't not eat meat every Friday or something like that. It was a way of practicing with the mind. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, put it this way: will you then, my spirit, never be good and simple and whole and vulnerable, as substantial as the body that surrounds you? Will you never be content and loving? Will you never be satisfied? Will you never desire harmony and healthy living? Will you never be satisfied with what you have and know it comes from the grace of the cosmos? Will you never stop finding fault with both nature and humanity? That's the way. To practice self-control is to think that, yes, the spirit itself, the human mind, as we would call it nowadays, the psyche, says more, now, now. But wait a minute. The body doesn't even need that. That next Twinkie is just not something you actually need. So shut your mind down from saying apple pie, apple pie. Stoic fortitude. Also, there is the power of indifference. So on the left side, you see a saying from Epictetus. He was a man of such a kind that when he was struck by any difficulty, he would write in praise of it. If fever was his lot, in praise of fever. If disrepute, in praise of disrepute. If exile, in praise of exile. So we're going to talk about journaling in a moment. But if anything that's happening that you want to complain about, sit down and write about it, the good part of it. Oh, my arm is so sore from my vaccination. Guess what? You got a vaccination, and that's a good thing. So write about the terrible thing of having a sore arm, but then reflect on what it actually means. Epictetus also said this: if anyone says someone has spoken ill of you, don't make excuses. Merely say, that's all he said about me? Wow, if he only knew. So practice the power of indifference. I actually don't care because I can't do anything about what you are saying or doing. The power of journaling isn't something that the Stoics talked about. Very simple reason for that. They didn't talk about it because it was de rigueur. It was absolutely what they did with their day. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius that we have today is not a book. It is really meditations to himself. Marcus Aurelius never intended for it to be published. These are personal reflections. As you go through the book, it repeats and repeats and repeats, because he was writing every morning when he got up about how to pull himself together for the day. That's why these things come out as small little blocks of wisdom. It's because they were actual reflections as he was getting up in the morning and thinking about his day as Roman emperor and what would be going on. So Marcus Aurelius, it's always called Meditations popularly, but really it is it's talking to himself, self-talk. There are lots and lots of versions out there. You can get many free translations online. If you're in the mood to buy try something that's collected. Gregory Hayes is a fairly recent of the translators, and it's a good book. But there are lots and lots of good ones out there, and you can also find lots of translations on the internet. You do need to be slightly careful that they are trying to be somewhat scholarly rather than trying to turn the Stoics into the contemporary self-help gurus. But that's really the only proviso there. But the power of journaling. Write something every day, reflect on what you are doing, what you're thinking, and then try to put the reasoned mind into that. And that is a very basic part of cognitive behavioral therapy, as a matter of fact. One of the most famous, and this goes directly into the Christian tradition, is memento mori. Remember that you're going to die. Marcus Aurelius puts it this way: think back on all those who have been, those you have known, and those you haven't. Now, remind yourself, where are they? Nowhere, or nobody knows where. Human beings are like smoke, and what has been won't be again in this infinite cosmos. That's very Stoic of him to think that the cosmos is a system of endless recycling of all the elements, and you, for a few moments, are like the smoke rising from a fire. You are what you are just right now, but you will be going back again into the elements of the universe. And to the Stoics, that's okay, because we're going to still be good within the infinite cosmos. The view from above, another Stoic exercise, something that they would focus on if they were getting too into the details of life. The view from above. Marcus Aurelius puts it this way: what can get us through? And the love of wisdom, that's what can get you through. Philosophy, right? But this requires we keep our minds free from violence and attack. This requires us to be judicious in pain and pleasure, requires us to be above lies and hypocrisy, independent of what others do or think. It requires that we accept what happens and what we have or don't have is coming from wherever it comes from, the same place we come from. You see this over and over among the Stoics, as they will say, just as he said about afterlife, nowhere or we don't know where. And the Stoics were quite okay with the mystery of where life goes, what its purpose is, and that kind of thing. He goes on. Finally, it takes waiting for death cheerfully, considering death nothing more than the dissolution of the elements that all living things are made of. Because if the elements are never damaged, changing from one thing to another, why should we human beings fear dissolving and changing? It's just what nature does, and there's nothing bad about what's natural. So there you go. Take the long view. You're going to be dead a long time. The planet was just fine without us for a very long time. And we have this blip of consciousness in which to live a flourishing life. Let's take that with both hands and try to live in wisdom and pro-sociality. Amor fati. Now, this is a little bit problematic in Stoicism. When you read the ancients, they did have an idea of fate, that certain things were fated, that they would have to happen. They thought that all worked for the good of everyone and in this fate, but they did think that way. Now, I would argue that the Stoics nowadays wouldn't think that, because the first thing they all said is you've got to figure out what the universe is like. Nowadays, we don't tend to believe that everything is fated. And so, nowadays, even if you want to be a Stoic, you probably are not going to believe that everything is going in a particular direction. But you can still think about the ways that they were thinking about these things. And Marcus Aurelius has this to say: you are composed of three things: body, breath, and mind. Of these, the first two are yours only in care. Only the third is truly your own. That's the mind or the spirit. if you separate from yourself everything that others say and do, and if you separate from the things that you have said and done in the past, and if you separate from yourself your worries about the future, and if you stop worrying about what you can't change about your body and the involuntary breathing that goes with it, then your mind can live pure and free no matter what swirling vortex of circumstances fate may bring, all the while doing what is just, accepting what happens, and telling the truth. So there you have it. If you don't worry about what you can't change, and guess what? You can't change the past, as we'll see in just a moment. Seneca talks about that as well. Can't change the past. Stop worrying. Get on with what is happening right now. This is the only thing that you can actually affect. And just remember, you've got to act justly, and you've got to tell the truth, and you've got to accept what happens. It's going to happen. So that's the way to get on with your life. Love what's happening. And then take time to reflect. Seneca the Younger most famously states this, and he's also going back to that guilt or remorse kind of thing that goes on. He says this: I make use of my opportunity, daily pleading my case at my own court. When the light has gone and my wife has fallen silent, aware as she is of my habit, I examine my entire day, going through what I have done and said. I conceal nothing from myself. I pass nothing by. I have nothing to fear from my errors, because I can say, see that you do not do this anymore. For now, you are excused. So going to bed at night, reflecting on the day, what did you do wrong? What would you accuse yourself of doing wrong for? Look at those errors. You are your own judge and jury, and you can say, don't do that anymore. But for now, you are excused. And so we get over the regrets and the guilt, and we go on with our lives, getting up the next morning, as Marcus Aurelius would say, thinking about how to do justice wisely today. So practice negative visualization, practice self-control, practice I don't care, journal, remember death, remember that mile-high view, love what is happening now, and take time to reflect. That is the Stoic program for a eudaimonic, a human flourishing life in the here and now, without any reference to any kind of supernatural beings or any kind of laws from ancient scriptures. So there you have it. It was a program that had been invented by the time that Christianity began to take over the Roman Empire, and was lost for quite some time, although the texts from especially the Roman Empire period did exist. And then we found the Greeks again, and now we know what they were talking about, and their wisdom was not stamped out with time. Makes you stop and think, doesn't it? And that's really what the Stoics will always say. Something happens, you can react differently than you did yesterday. Stop and think how acting justly will be the better way to go. I mentioned Massimo Pagliucci. He is a contemporary ethicist and college professor. He is a part of the American Humanist Association today. And he wrote, I think, the best book on how to be a Stoic using ancient philosophy to live a modern life. It's available all over the place, used copies, etc., audiobooks, etc. Massimo Pagliucci is a neo-Stoic. So he'll talk about how that disjunct between what the ancients were thinking and the ways that Stoicism can be used to make for a better life today, so that you can keep calm and get your Stoic on. This month, we're talking about something like that. Our monthly theme for First Unitarian Society in April is becoming, not being, but becoming, because we are all works in progress. And I'll be talking about that on Sunday morning, 10:30 Central Time, becoming, befuddled. And yep, I'll probably be mentioning a little bit out of neo-Stoicism along the way. Join us next week, The Holes in Liberalism. We'll be examining some ideas of how liberal theology, but also liberal social programming and politics have some disjuncts that we probably need to think about as we try to establish a more just society. Thanks for listening this week, and I'll see you Sunday or next Monday. Thank you.